welcome to Take Time. I'm your host, Patrick Marlatt, and let's talk about the Gavox Avidiver. I just got the combination of aviation and diver right there. I don't know why that didn't stand out immediately, but yeah, the Gavox Avidiver. This is a new dive watch from the Gavox brand, and I've got a lot to say about it. Yes, the Gavox Avidiver featured in our part 1 video. And guys, if you're new to the channel, here's how these 2-part reviews work. In our first part, I do an unboxing and first impression, and I take any viewer-related questions, comments, or concerns and answer them in our part 2 video right off the top of the bat. And as with all the other reviews here on the channel, I give my own opinion, starting with the bad, moving on to the good, before giving my final verdict of a review item. So we have 2 of the Gavox Avidiver models in front of us. This is the black dial steel case, and we have the black DLC coated blue dial sunburst finish dial. And I'm going to feature these 2 in our part 2 review because most of what I've posted on Instagram and most of what I've talked about over in our part 1 video pertained to the white dial version. So I want to give you guys a little bit more time with these 2. Also, I finished off my review period with these watches by wearing the black DLC version of the watch. I usually don't go for watches with the coating. I don't really like coatings on watches. And again, there's usually an upcharge for the coating. In this instance, this is 50 euros more over the stainless steel variant. But I've actually got some positive things to say about it. The thing that bothers me most with DLC coatings is that they wear out over time, and then you have a watch that looks worn, and not necessarily in a good way. But you know, that's something that's either going to bother you or not going into the purchase. But before I go over any of my other opinions, let's talk about some viewer-related questions. And there weren't too much. As a matter of fact, this one just received a lot of compliments on the overall aesthetic and watches that fall into a similar category or similar style. But in regards to a handful of the questions I received, I heard questions about legibility. For me, legibility wasn't a major issue. It mostly pertained to the fact that these watches have a sort of sandwich style composition. You'll notice that the hour markers are recessed into the dial, and I've actually never owned or used a watch that has this feature, but essentially they're cutouts, and the cutouts are loomed with, you know, thick plots of Luminova in this instance, and they're fine. I mean, most of the issue in regards to legibility was in concerns to the white dial version of the watch. It wasn't hard to read whatsoever. These are actually very legible timepieces. To me, the dial is actually akin to the big triangle Omega Seamasters of old. There's 2 variations of those. There's one with a 12 numeral, and there was one with a huge triangle at the 12 o'clock position. And this really does remind me of that aesthetic. And, you know, those watches were superiorly legible. They're made for military use. And Gavox is sort of, I don't want to say copying, but influence from that style. And you see that influence here. It was definitely an apparent influence in regards to the triangle situation at the 12 o'clock position, as well as having the 3, 6, and 9 indicated on the dial. And while the font choice is different than the Omega I mentioned, and some of you guys might know which watch that is, you can sort of see what I'm talking about here. And excuse the misaligned 12 o'clock there. I'm sure it's bothering some people, but it's never really a major issue with that secondary crown. It actually sets really, really well. And it's actually quite easy to set the triangle precisely where you want it without having it move one direction or the other. And, I can illustrate that in a second for you, actually. But as we get ready to discuss the mainline feature on this dive watch, which is that big triangle that rotates around the dial face, I want to touch on the loom. Loom was something I was asked about. It's something I'm commonly asked about in regards to watches I featured here on the channel. I don't really like talking about loom. It's sort of a null point for me. Usually I like to buy watches without loom. If a watch does feature loom and is a dive watch, I'll definitely feature a loom shot for you guys. So as you're seeing now, the triangle, actually, which was a pleasant surprise, the triangle at the 12 o'clock is loomed itself, as well as the hour markings and the outline of the triangle. And it's a very nice bright loom, even in tone and color and brightness across the handset to the dial. They did a wonderful job executing the loom application here. And I love the fact that the triangle is also illuminated. It only makes sense, but there's a thick amount of loom on the triangle, and its longevity or its time illuminated is just as well or as nice as the rest of the dial features. So my main concern and that of others in regards to the triangle was how well it would set into the watch. And as you might have known from my Seiko Alpinist review here on the channel, that featured a secondary crown that was not screw down. I predominantly wanted it to be screw down for the simple fact that I didn't want the compass ring rotating around the dial as I wore it. It was just an annoyance. And if that kind of thing bothers you, having something misaligned on your watch in any which way, that might bother you. A compass ring is a different story, but this big triangle here, having this offset might be displeasing unless you're using it to time something or another. So it's actually quite easy to set into the watch and secure. So it is screwed down, unlike the Alpinist I mentioned. And what's nice about it is that when you push it down and begin screwing, you can see that the triangle doesn't move whatsoever. They've made it so that when it engages the threading, I'm just going to assume this works like every other rotating inner ring I've ever used on a watch. There's usually teeth around the entirety of that ring, and then there are teeth on a screw, a bolt. We're going to say a bolt on the secondary crown that engage the teeth on the ring, and that's what causes it to spiral around the dial. When you push the crown in, it disengages that, and you can just securely place that secondary crown against the watch case. So there's never really any fear of that moving when you're setting it or moving while you wear the watch, and that's a huge plus in my book. Again, I like to start with the bad here, but that was something that was discussed over just in messages in the comments and Instagram that I wanted to touch on. It's fine here. It works very well. Legibility, loom, and the big triangle. Those were the main questions here. So, by the way, I've mentioned Instagram. I like to post images of watches I'm wearing over on there, and I allow people to ask me questions there as well. I like to continue the conversation on that platform when I'm not airing a video here on the channel or not able to as quickly answer questions here on the channel. I'm almost always on Instagram posting images, maybe 4 to 5 times a week these days. So if you did have a question about a watch that's being featured, feel free to ask over there as well. It's totally fine. You can find me over at Take Time Pad. And if you want to share any of your watches in your collection, perhaps you have a Gavox Avidiver, you can do so by hashtagging Take Time Pad. More than any other watch I've reviewed here on the channel, I found that these crown guards are more of a nuisance than a problem solver in regards to the crowns here. One of my issues is that the crowns are quite small and hard to grip altogether. And you can see that the crown guards come up on those crowns and choke around those crowns quite close to them. And it just makes gripping the crowns difficult, especially if you have bigger hands like I do. It's not the easiest thing to grip on and release from the body. You get used to it, but your fingers will hit the crown guards. It may cause a small bit of discomfort. It's not bad enough to make this a serious bad note, but it is a nuisance, and it's definitely going to bother some people. I've never really had this issue before, and it's predominantly because I think these crown guards are quite sharp on the opposite end. So yeah, there is a little bit of discomfort when operating the crowns on this watch. And the good bit of news is, when you set the time on this watch, and if you're wearing it regularly, you're not going to have to worry about going in and resetting the time and or date unless the date changes over on the next month. But minor bad note there. Now, I will say that the date window on the blue dial face is a little bit more prominent, and that's only because it uses the same date wheel as the black model over here. So, it does punch out from the dial because there's just this, small black pit over at the 4 o'clock position. You're like, oh, there's numbers on that black pit. Oh, it's a date wheel. Got it. It's a little bit easier to distinguish where that is on this dial and read it here, oddly enough. And again, this is the one I I was finishing my review off with, and I have to say I actually quite like this model above the other two. I like the subtle sunburst finish on the dial, but we'll delve into that when we move on to our good notes. Another bad note I had about this watch, and it's actually not to do with the watch head this go around, but the rubber strap that these come fitted with. And this was not a question that was brought up in our Avidiver Part 1 video, but on another review item that I just posted a video for here on the channel, it was a silicone-based rubber strap, and I was asked about the lint magnetism. How much lint did the strap pick up? And it's not something I commonly think of, because most of the rubber straps I use, I put on dive watches or watches with a higher water resistance rating, because I feel like rubber is a practical application for those types of watches. And generally, I'll just wash my hands and wash the rubber strap off before I set that watch aside. So I don't really think about how much lint it picks up. However, bearing that in mind with this review, I found myself attracted to how much lint was built up on these straps. And unfortunately, I have to say that these guys are lint magnets. These pick up a lot of lint day to day. And is it the end of the world? No, it's a dive watch. Again, do the same thing I do. If you're washing your hands or you're just putting your watch aside, you can run some water over this, dry it off, and all the lint will be removed. But I will say that it picks up lint quite easily. I would put it 8 out of 10 on the lint magnetism scale. It certainly picks up more lint than the average strap, and it's more noticeable on the darker colors. The orange strap that's on the white version of this watch, I didn't notice it as much, but this blue one, yeah, a whole heck of a lot. You know, I'd pull it out of my coat sleeve. I wear a leather jacket when it's wintertime, and I'll pull it out of the coat sleeve, and it's just like collected all of the lint that was on the lining of my coat, which is great for my coat. Not necessarily great for my watch strap, and it was a little distracting. So if that's something that bothers you, note that the straps that these come with are lint magnets. Now, the last bad note I'd like to mention about these watches is just the overall appearance of the case. I'm a huge fan of the dial configuration of all three models I received, but I'm not a big fan of the case shape in its entirety. The overall design is a little brutish. Is that a word? It's very much a tool watch. It's a slab of steel that someone threw crowns on that had stems that attached to a movement inside of this slab of steel, and you're able to operate it as a watch. So if you like a rugged, toolish design, this has it in spades. However, it's almost just a little too on the nose. I feel like there could have been more detailing to this case, something to, diversify it from other tool watches. It has a lot of similar lines that I've seen on modern fleegers, modern divers. It doesn't feel unique in that sense. What I can say is that it's more rectangular than the opposition, because it has these fat lugs that almost go out at the points where the sides of these cases extend. So, that's unique in and of itself. But what I'm really saying is that the dial is so unique and interesting. I was hoping that the case would match, and I don't think the case is a great pairing for this dial configuration. I would love to have had a more unique design to the case as well. And I'm sure the counter argument there is, maybe this dial is busy enough as it is. A case that was even remotely busy might muck up the zen to this watch, the overall flow of design. But I think that we could have gone with a slightly more interesting case to draw your eyes towards the body of this watch, as well as the dial face. However, transitioning into our good notes, I think the cases are extremely well built. Even though I don't like how small the crowns are on these guys and how aggressive the crown guards are, I do like the detailing and finishing of these cases. I think they're fine in that regard. You do feel like you would be getting your money's worth in that sense. The only thing I would alternatively do here is perhaps put bigger crowns on this watch and maybe give it a little bit more shapely a presence with the case. However, I do like the overall finish of the case in relation to the rubber strap. And on that note, the rubber strap in combination with this case wears extremely well on the wrist. It's very, very comfortable watch to wear right out of the box. And that's partly indebted to how supple that rubber strap is. One minor bad note I'll touch on here while I'm giving you some good notes is that this strap length is just a little short. I feel like it could have been a little bit longer. For me, it wears right about here, and you can actually see the outline of where the other keeper has been this whole time. This just barely fits under that secondary keeper when I wear this watch. So, I would personally just remove this. But, I don't think my wrists are that big. It's 7 1/4. I feel like if you have a larger wrist than me, it might be a more difficult fit. But aside from the length, I feel these are designed extremely well and they're extremely comfortable on the wrist. Speaking of, I'd love to provide you guys with a wrist shot of this timepiece. This is the Gavox Avidiver in black and blue on a 7 1/4 inch wrist. That is exactly what it'll look like for all of your admirers. And you can see what I'm talking about there with the strap. That secondary keeper is just barely hanging in there. But here is what the watch will look like when you go to admire it. And here it is on my 7 1/4 inch wrist. And as you can see what I mean, it is a very rugged looking design. This is definitely a tool watch. There's no denying that. Even with that sunburst blue finish on the dial, there's no mistaking that this watch was built for task. And it's also an extremely comfortable one at that. So thank goodness. I do like the pairing with these rubber straps. And I think the two work very well together. Again, I like that stylistic choice here on the rubber as it tapers down to the bottom of your wrist. You have these little wings that arch out to meet the lugs. It's just a good look. No complaints there. Again, I think if your wrist is a little bit smaller than mine, I would probably say 6 3/4 inch wrist. Maybe this is too big. The lug is quite tall, but I think a 7-inch wrist and above would be able to wear this just fine. Now, for those of us looking to purchase this watch outside of Europe, the asking price is right around 540 euros, which is well over $600. And for a lot of the commenters that message me on this particular watch, there is a lot in the sub $500, sub $800 category of tool watches, in particular dive watches, that are phenomenal value for money. The Miyota 9015 is a great movement. I've had a great experience with it. Does it warrant the cost? The level of detailing and finish on this DLC coated one in particular, again, which is $50, 50 euros rather more in value, does it warrant the cost? And it's a tough sell. I honestly think that with a price adjustment at around 500, these would be excellent. I mean, I feel like these would sell a lot quicker at that $500 asking price because it would be in stiff competition with a lot of other watches that have similar feature sets. The gimmick, or rather feature, of the big triangle is unique. I think it's a great stylistic choice for this watch. Does it enhance the use or user experience? I wouldn't say so, not really. I think it's a more secure way, just like the internal diving bezels of old on those super compressors. I think it's a more secure way to time a dive or time any given function in your life. Dive watches, I don't feel are used as often by actual divers. I think they're mostly used by consumers like us. If it's a feature you're interested in acquiring, this is one of the only ways I can think of you getting a big triangle that rotates around your dial. But is it something that you necessarily need? And that most obviously is something you're going to answer yourself. Again, I think if this watch was in the 500 to 550 US currency region, it would be a really great value proposition. It is a little costly for what you're getting right now. I would spend this much for a bracelet version of the watch, for sure. I think that $100 bump in price would warrant a nice bracelet. But the silicone straps are decent. I think they're in line with most of the straps I've seen that range in the $15 to maybe $35 region. I think if the prices were brought down, this would be a much better proposition to consumers. However, it is a very well detailed design and constructed watch, so there is all of that. I mean, we'll see what happens. You know, all of the designs from the Gavox brand are going to be larger in scale, rugged, and tool-like in design. I mean, they're all built to task. So you're buying from a company that produces quality watches like the Gavox Squadron I've talked on before here on YouTube for military purposes. So these are very, very cool watches to get into. I think this should have been the consumer grade model that was more accessible for people, and it still can be. I think this is an awesome watch. With the Mark II, maybe put on bigger crowns, maybe taper the lugs a little bit more. I don't know. The stylistic choices are purely opinionated, but all in all, I think it's a decent watch. Maybe a little bit lower in price, and we'd have a great deal. At any rate, if you found this video enlightening or in the least entertaining, feel free to hit that like button. It looks a little something like this guy. If you have friends, forums, or groups that are interested in picking up the Gavox Avidiver or just looking into a unique new dive watch, well, maybe share this video with them so that they can get another consumer's opinion about the watch. Also, if you're new to the channel, welcome. I do videos like this twice a week. They're all watch-based content, so if this is your thing, well, guess what? This is a good home for you. Feel free to hit that subscribe button if you want to see when these videos release. And if you want to see precisely when they release, you can hit the bell icon just next to that, and you will be alerted as to when my videos air. Again, my name is Patrick Marlad, and thank you for the time.